A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a huge privilege to be here. My first visit to AgriBusiness. The reputation goes before it. I heard many people saying in the run-up it is comparable with the Oxford Farming Conference. So it's a great privilege to be here, and thank you for inviting me. Andrew, your chairman, very kindly said on the way over, presumably you're getting a lot of media training now you're in the top job, and I sort of looked slightly surprised at him. And I said, well, there isn't time for any media training. I've done 18 bilaterals in the last 3 months, let alone anything else. So I'm then sort of feeling slightly, you talk about your presentation skills. I think you say no media training. You just have to take me as I am at this time. I feel of enormous responsibility on behalf of the NFU and my fellow office holders, Guy Smith and Stuart Roberts. I've titled this Risk, Change and Opportunity. So I can't come here today and not talk to you about the huge risk, and I know everybody is suffering from massive Brexit fatigue. But I also want to talk about the need for us to embrace change, and this is really going to be about change. And then I want to move on to talk about the opportunity, because it's really important for the NFU that, yes, we are lobbying right here, right now, on what trade should look like, but that we're also planning a strategy for the future. So, for those of you that were listening to the Today programme, on the way here, yes, 135 days to go. We've been through all the speeches, so we've been through Lancaster House, we've been through Florence, we've been through Mansion House, and then finally Chequers. And I met with the Prime Minister on the 21st of June. And our main concern up to that point was that agri-food had been carved out. So she was talking about harmonisation for pharmaceuticals, for goods, the car industry, but on food and agriculture, you were always coming down into a separate paragraph saying this is where we need flexibility. And this really has been the sort of pawn, I guess, in all of this. Will our standards of production be protected? And I'm going to come on to more of that in a minute. But it is the reason why we supported Chequers, because I said it is an absolute red line for the farming unions across the UK that our standards will not be adhered to. So we supported Chequers primarily because it sets a customs framework for free and frictionless trade, and it also sets a framework for the movement of people. But we should be under no illusions that this is not about the end game. This is not about the final economic relationship. This is purely, and always was going to be, about the Irish situation. It was always going to be, how can we find agreement on the Irish border? How can we find agreement on the backstop? And that is really all Chequers is. It sets out a foundation document for future discussion. So that is where we are now, but we cannot, and no matter how optimistic some people are, or how depressed some people are over the news today and the 500 pages that we need to wade through, no deal remains a live risk. And it is, I guess, for us about hoping for the best and planning for the worst. And I know it's going to be touched on later. Indeed, DEFRA are absolutely full on no deal planning. And why? I've done various meetings where people say, well, look, it'll only be a bump in the road. No deal is it's no bad thing. So I just want to touch on why I have said, this is catastrophic. And it's not a word that I use lightly. And I want to bring a little bit of understanding of why we say it's catastrophic. One of the success stories for consumers, for farmers, for all of you here today has been the just-in-time workings with the EU. It's driven seismic change for the food industry, and we work basically on a 48-hour basis. And of course, the Dover-Calais Straits are incredibly important. And I know you will have shared my shock when we realised that Dominic Raab had only just seemingly worked out that we were an island nation, and that Dover-Calais was indeed an important route. How many times are we saying that? And you tend to think the blindingly obvious is indeed blindingly obvious. We learn lessons the hard way sometimes. But look, I think the challenge for farming is that it's been made very clear to us that in order to make food affordable, in order not to see price spikes in food, the tariff wall will be lowered or potentially taken away completely to allow free access of food coming in from the EU. Of course, you can't just do that for the EU. Once you lower or obliterate the tariff wall, it is the same for every country that you allow food in without a tariff. We then face, for animal and animal products and the organic certified sector, we then face potentially a 6-month wait, potentially longer, to regain market access back to the EU. Now, it is right that that could all be dealt with straight away, but it is the EU that would have to pass that emergency legislation in order that we achieve the free and frictionless trade. So you've got a situation where you've taken away tariffs for food coming in, you're carved out of your marketplace, have lost market access. And then, of course, when you come out of your 6-month period or longer, you are faced with the highest tariff wall. Now, we know for lamb, potentially the most impacted sector in all of this, that would be a 68% tariff. So you are indeed priced out of your marketplace. So there are good reasons why we say it is catastrophic. And I think it would be a total dereliction of duty for Parliament not to agree a deal. And indeed, the NFU remains absolutely hopeful that they will, but it is right that we plan for the worst. Now this one, many of you will have seen my letter in Farmers Weekly to George Hollingbury. So many warm words, you know, Liam Fox, fantastic Mr. Fox out there saying that, you know, our standards will be protected, we won't allow product in that's being produced to lower standards. How? How? Because at the moment they are hugely resistant to putting in any legislation within the agriculture bill. Putting the legislation in the agriculture bill and then in the trade bill is the only way of testing the honesty. And it really is yes or no. And Michael Gove himself has threatened to lie down in front of a bus over his dead body. And I said, Secretary of State, we don't want this written in blood, we just want it legislated. And it's a key question for the future and will affect actually all of us much more than the budget. So testing the honesty on this one is really, really important. But now we come on to change. And this agricultural bill, Rob, you referred to it, it's an enabling bill. There's a lot of things that we as a union called for within that bill. But that said, when we were given oversight the night before and we were reading through the policy statement, you know, I read it and I said to our Director General Terry Jones, I said, well, this is the environment bill. This isn't an agricultural bill. There was no mention of farming. There was no mention of food. And in Michael Gove's own words, he miscalculated it. He got it wrong. He's now widely acknowledged that he's not talked about food enough. He commented to me at the time, well, I've written an op-ed, and the op-ed is all about food. But it really shows that the bill is one thing, but actually the bill will survive and thrive on the back of the right policy. And the concerns we have is that it does hand a huge amount of power to a future Secretary of State and to government. So out of a relatively small bill, you have 36 clauses, you have 28 powers, you only have 3 duties. So 28 powers is Secretary of State may decide to intervene, market failure, Secretary of State may decide to intervene. Only 3, Secretary of State shall have to intervene. Now you can see why they've left it open, you can see why they've left flexibility, because they don't even know who we're going to be trading with. They don't know where the UK is actually going to dock in the world. But it is, when we say we are living in extraordinary times, we really are living in extraordinary times. Now, I chair the Farming Organisations Group, which has all of the farming unions sitting on it, and indeed all farming organisations, CLA, TFA, Soil Association, LEAF, etc., etc. And when Michael Gove came in and spoke to that meeting the day the bill was published, there's a lot of great stuff in there on the supply chain that we knew wasn't going to be in there. And just to highlight the way the political system is working, he then announced to this group, He said, well, you know, I know the NFU have been talking about the supply chain for a long time, but he said it was only when I was with Minette and Hilary McGrady at Countryfile Live at the National Trust event that I really realised, when the Wildlife Trust and the RSPB and others started talking about volatility and the complexity and the unfairness of the supply chain, that I had to do something about it. And you just think, oh my goodness, this was in a field in the middle of Oxfordshire. It's not really where you think ministers provide life-changing legislation. But what it shows is that we all have to be, and Rob referred to the coalitions that they've built, we have to be big tent operators. You know, it is no good for me just saying the NFU says, this is the NFU's opinion. We have to bring a large consensus together. And I was absolutely thrilled when the RSPB said, what are you going to do about volatility? And the Wildlife Trust said, and what are you going to do about the unfairness of the supply chain? And you could see Michael Gove thinking, my goodness, you know, you're not meant to be talking about that. It's how we have to operate going forwards. We have to bring people together. We have to cease the fragmentation, and we have to build better understanding. I know Charlotte's put me on a traffic light system on time, so I have, I'm not on amber yet, so I'm quite safe, but I have a bit to get through, and I want to take time on your questions, and I think Rob covered off on the bill well, but it'll be all about the policy that they put over it. And not forgetting in all of this that we have 17% of farming businesses at the moment unprofitable with direct support. 42% of farming businesses without direct support would be unprofitable. So when I gave evidence to the House of Lords yesterday, I gave them those stats and I said, where is that 42% coming from? Because this is public money for public goods. It is stepping back from the market. How is that going to be addressed? And it remains a fundamental question. And it's why our evidence has said, and I was delighted Tim Brightmeyer as President of the CLA and George Dunn from the TFA supported the ask in the bill that we can pause, we can vary, and indeed ministers will have the power to reverse. And I think that is a very, very important amendment. Moving on to this now is talking about opportunity, because I think it's really important for the NFU to show leadership, to facilitate wider conversations, and really now to look at farming through two lenses. Farming doesn't resonate with wider society. It doesn't actually resonate with wider politicians. So we have to look at farming through the lens of the environment and through the lens of food. And this is a major new initiative for us to take back control. 72% of Britain is farmland, and we really want the voice of farmers to be heard, and we want to look at taking back control of the environment. So we are launching a report on the 11th of December. Many of you have hopefully had an invite to that conference in London, and I look forward to seeing you there. But I think it's important that we take ownership of this agenda again. I was approached by a couple of members of staff saying, we want to have a bio-blitz on your farm back in the summer, and I had to actually look up what a bio-blitz was. They came out and we had a whole load of environmental recorders out on my farm. We looked at everything that was there. So we recorded all the birds. There were 60 different bird species. We recorded all the moths. There were 40 different moths, the invertebrates, the insects. And I have to say, I felt sort of shameful in some ways that I have farmed this land for many, many years. I grew up on that same land. And I hadn't really looked beyond farming. I hadn't actually looked at the other inhabitants on my HLS ground. So it was a fascinating thing to do. This report is not going to be, we're brilliant, we're wonderful. It is absolutely going to be focusing on what's working. We have brilliant things going on, and we are an industry that is under challenge. You know, the WWF said the other day, the UK is the most degraded landscape in Europe. That is wrong. And we can only challenge it by building our own evidence base and doing the work. So this, for me, when I became president, I wanted to be able to host the first environment conference. We are hosting it. We are publishing a report. It is a document that needs to be revisited probably every 3 years, but I want farmers to have ownership of the environment back. It is also important that we focus now on a food strategy. I've said to Michael Gove from day one, we have had no meaningful food policy on the table for many, many years. You, as government, have allowed the major retailers to run the food show for a very long time. You are out of touch with the food system, and we need to drive change. But rather than wait for Michael Gove and indeed Henry Dimbleby, who's leading on this work, to publish a report, and then the NFU comes out and says, well, we don't like that, and if we were going to do it, we would have done it like this. We have to cease being less reactive. So we published this report, UK, a nation united by food, on the 12th of September. We had all the farming unions there in London to launch it. And it's very much a supporting document, I hope, to government's work. It's not about the NFU. It is not about the NFU owns a food strategy. It has been about bringing a wider audience together. We've had 2 roundtables so far, and it has 4 key cornerstones. The first one being integrity and standards, looking at how we can value food. Looking at the challenge we face when we say we don't want food produced to lower standards to come onto our marketplace, what exactly do we mean? And what do consumers feel? Because consumers tend to feel that the global food system is one, that actually there isn't much difference between what is going on in the UK to what is going on in the rest of the world. And we need to be able to bring that to life in a way that brings a large group together and discusses how integrity and standards is going to work going forward. So it was a great pleasure to welcome Chris Elliott to the first roundtable, who of course led a lot of the work on the transformation of the food system after Horsegate. I just touched briefly on the poultry industry, probably one of our biggest success stories. Massively under threat with the US trade deal. They have risen to this government's challenge, which was around lowering our antibiotic use, being responsible users of antibiotics. We rose to that challenge, and the poultry industry, and indeed the other industries, have done it. Poultry now down to 17 mg per kilogram. The US, on the other hand, is a nation that hasn't even had the conversation yet and still is at 60 mg. If we're going to be meaningful about this, we have to do the work. But secondly, I've got an orange light flashing now, okay? The moral imperative of food production. Why actually do we need to produce food in the UK? We remember Margaret Beckett saying, actually, do you know what? We're a wealthy nation. We don't need to produce food. That ethos, that thought process is still alive and well in government. They still feel that actually, the metropolitan elite can have a conversation around food, and actually the poorer people on low incomes, people who are really struggling to make ends meet, who are leading really challenging lives, there's a sort of conversation going on, well, they can eat cheap food. All those lines from Jacob Rees-Mogg, Brexit's going to be great because we're going to have cheaper food. And we really have to challenge why we should be producing food in the UK, why we should be maximising our food production capacity. 67 million mouths to feed, extra mouths to feed every year. We should be playing our part. Many of you, I hope, will have seen the Iceland video that was stopped from being their Christmas advert because it was deemed too political. If you haven't looked at it, look at it. It's about the deforestation, annihilation of the rainforest that is going on by exporting your production and your conscience abroad. Have a look at that video because it brings this to life. Health and nutrition. This is a conversation that we as farmers have not really been in, and we really need to be in it. Now, if you speak to livestock or dairy farmers, they don't actually like the Eat Well plate. The point is, the Eat Well plate is what is there at the moment, and if we want to change it, then we absolutely need to be having the conversation. Health and nutrition, incredibly important. There are no bad whole foods. There are plenty of bad diets. We face an obesity crisis, and it's absolutely right that farmers and growers should be at the heart of the healthy foods agenda. Moving on to the last cornerstone of this work, which is about respecting nature, agriculture's relationship with nature. Fascinating when I was at Harper Adams the other day to look at the work that they are doing on metaldehyde use, by, yeah, wait for it, anaesthetizing slugs, chipping slugs, and then drone mapping the slugs. I mean, the thought that you could anaesthetize a slug is quite astounding. But the point being, and Peter Kendall I think, did a brilliant job for us in highlighting climate change, changing weather events, how we as farmers should be at the forefront of those changes and be a big part of the solution. And how we farm is an integral part of meeting the climate change agenda. And actually our farming footprint is globally extremely good. There are things that we can do and we can do better, but it's going to be about new innovation. It's going to be about new tech. It's going to be about the young people, the Harper Adams students of tomorrow that are driving the changes that we need to see. So, just running into the red light territory now. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to finish by saying that, you know, whether this is Brexit or no Brexit, whether this is deal or no deal, we have 66 million people within our home market, and we really do need to be focusing on that. So there are a lot of challenges out there. There is a huge amount of risk. I hope I've brought to life, in a small way, our plans for how we want farmers at the heart of environment policy, of how we feel farmers in the industry can shape a new food strategy. But we shouldn't take our eyes off the 66 million. I can absolutely promise you that the eyes of the world's farmers are on our market. It's deemed a prized market, brought home to me by the Canadians when I met with them a while back. And the Canadians said, CETA might have taken 10 years. CETA was for one reason alone. It was gaining access to the UK market. I hope that's given you a whirlwind trip through what we are doing. And Charlotte, I hope I finished on time, just and allowed important time for questions. Thank you very much for listening.